So my final review for House of the Dragon Season 2 is going to be structured a little different from my normal weekly reviews. In this review, I want to take a step back and look at the season as a whole, its character arcs, its narrative, the big events, the good elements and the bad. Season 2 has been very polarising, to say the least. You either see people who absolutely hated it, saying it's worse than Game of Thrones Season 8, and then some who love it and swear it's better than Game of Thrones ever was. In truth, the whole debate has actually become quite toxic. But there is a middle ground, and it is possible to approach the topic with a bit more balance. I think the issue with the fandom today is people don't like to be told that their opinion is wrong, and take great personal insult when others don't view things as they do. Everyone views and consumes media differently. Different people value and care about different things. What I like and I enjoy might be very different from what you like and enjoy, and that's okay. Don't feel the need to like something just because others do. Or don't try and hate something you enjoy because someone else says it's bad. We all have our own subjective opinion and experience. It's why I've always enjoyed talking about Fire and Blood, because every reader has their own interpretation of the story. So no, I don't think House of the Dragon Season 2 was as bad as Game of Thrones Season 8, but at the same time, it's hardly a 10 out of 10 either. Honestly, it's fine, it's okay. The question is, given the reputation of HBO and Game of Thrones, a lot of people were expecting a lot more than just okay, especially with how HBO approached marketing the season. The pacing of Season 2 is something that has been criticised a lot, and while to some extent there is definitely some issues with the pacing, in a way, I think it was kind of inevitable. Season 2 was going to feel like this, given how much time and story Season 1 needed to cover with its 3 time jumps. Season 2 does feel a little bit more pedestrian to some degree, but I don't think that's necessarily a good or a bad thing, depending on how you approach it and you write it. Put simply, the writers had only 22 pages of book content to adapt over 8 episodes, compared to the 100 plus pages Season 1 had to deal with. Therefore, events don't feel as compressed as they did in Season 1, allowing us to spend much more time with the characters, both minor and major. But this did result in a situation where the pace wasn't exactly what I'd call slow, just a bit inconsistent. A pattern seemed to emerge, where we would get an action-heavy episode, or an episode with lots of moving parts, followed by an episode of reaction to what's just happened. Thus, we end up with a pace that's very stop and start. But I think it's much more to do with the inherent nature of adapting Fire and Blood, and choosing to focus so heavily on characters like Daemon, Alicent and Rhaenyra. During this section of Fire and Blood that Season 2 is adapting, all 3 of these characters in fact really do very little when compared to their roles in Season 1. We have Rhaenyra still recovering from her miscarriage, not really doing much till the fall of King's Landing, then Alicent with her role becoming much less prominent. Like Rhaenyra, she does very little between the Green Council and the fall of King's Landing. In both these cases, the show created new arcs for them, but because we were waiting for the narrative to progress to a part where they had more meaningful impact, it did kind of feel like they were treading water somewhat. Daemon kind of has a similar issue. In the book, we know he goes to Harrenhal to rally the Riverlords. We hear next to nothing about his time there, with it maybe covering a few paragraphs of Fire and Blood. Thus, Daemon, like Alicent and Rhaenyra, in some ways felt like he was treading water waiting for the narrative to progress. That doesn't necessarily mean his character arc wasn't entertaining, but it wasn't so central in driving the story this season. But given how these characters were positioned as the main and lead characters of the show, this was always going to be inevitable this season. The writers were always going to find something for them to do, even if it did negatively impact the perceived pacing of the show. The fact the writers also had to rework the whole season from 10 episodes to 8, with very short notice before production was due to start, also definitely messed with the structure of the planned season, with events such as the fall of King's Landing and the Battle of the Gullet being pushed back to the start of Season 3. I think the telltale signs of the season having to be pieced together is exactly how the events of the sowing of the Dragonseeds are almost split over 2 episodes, and the fact I believe that Tywin Lannister's scenes with the Triarchy were supposed to be spread out over 3 or 4 episodes at the back end of the season. That's why they felt so out of place during the season final. They needed those scenes to establish the Gullet, but at the same time didn't have time or narrative space to include them in prior episodes. So did the season have an issue with pace? In some places, in some storylines, yes. But I think it's much more symptomatic of how season 1 was so fast-paced, and also a key element will be covered in the next section of this review. How the marketing really messed with viewer expectations of what we were getting this season, which in turn impacted how viewers perceived the pace of the show. I don't think the way HBO chose to market the season really helped matters. Namely, the trailer and general messaging was this was going to be a season of wall-to-wall action, with bloody battles with lots of characters dying. In fact, most of the shots we see in the trailer of any armies or conflict are either from Rook's Rest or the montage of the armies marching from that last scene of the season finale. Now, it's the job of a trailer to sell the show and make sure people are watching. But in this case, I think it really set expectations for viewers that this season was never going to meet. Yes, there were battles and action and death, but not to the extent the trailer suggested. Now, if you were a book fan, you know going into the season what roughly was going to happen. I wasn't expecting what the trailer was suggesting. In fact, in my trailer breakdown, I mentioned this very point. But if you're just a casual fan or an average viewer who saw the trailer once and sat down to watch the show every week, you're going in expecting something that was not going to happen. It's like HBO knows the dragon action element of the show is what a lot of the more casual audience gets hyped up for. Thus use that to sell the season without really thinking about the message it was really sending. So I want to take some time to talk about a few of the character arcs this season. I'm not going to cover all of them, just the ones that stood out to me for good reasons and some bad reasons. It is the duality of season 2, that for everything I liked about it, there's an element I don't. First off, let's talk about Daemon and his adventures in Dreamland. Well, Daemon's arc was very divisive this season, and trust me, I get where people who were not fans of it are coming from. My girlfriend, for example, hated it. She was enjoying the dreams at first, but felt like it was being dragged out way too long and slowed down the story, and that's a perfectly valid opinion to have. But the moment I saw what they were going to be doing with Daemon this season, I knew it would be a love it, hate it sort of situation. To be fair, the dreams do make up about 75% of Daemon's screen time this season, so if you're not a fan of it, it's kind of a problem. But myself, as someone who loves the deep lore of Westeros and finds the mysteries of Harrenhal fascinating, Daemon's arc became something I looked forward to each week. Each dream we got to look into his psyche and explored why Daemon is the way he is and what motivates him. Also, the way it's been framed with these dreams, we physically get to see him confront these issues himself. I do suspect while the writers did plan on having a few dream sequences, they did see it as an opportunity to bring back Millie Alcock and Paddy Constantine and drop a few other bits of lore at the same time. The only one that did leave me scratching my head was of course the Alyssa Targaryen sex scene, which was, well, a choice. I get what they were trying to communicate with it, the message of Daemon's relationship with his mother and Viserys, but for me, well, it was so bizarre it was actually distracting and really took me out of the moment. But the dreams themselves were only part of the arc. We also have his troubles with Riverlords. It was interesting to see Daemon challenged in a way he hasn't been before. He's so used to being Daemon Targaryen, the rogue prince, the blood of the dragon, rocking up and people doing what he commands. To have some pushback from the Riverlords and seeing Daemon try and manage that was to me quite compelling television. I think the light-hearted and quirky humour of Simon Strong really added a little bit of fun and humour into what could have been a dour storyline for Daemon this season. Then of course you have, let's call it his friendship with Alice Rivers. I've always found Alice a fascinating character in the book. And while in Fire and Blood we have no record of interaction between her and Daemon, I loved they had her be such a key part in Daemon's journey this season. What really pleased me about it is, as of now, they've still kept a lot of her mystery alive, with her true nature and motivations still not known. Why is she so invested in Daemon? Why is she pushing him down this path of self-discovery? So many questions that I do think we will get answers to, one way or another, by the end of the story. Daemon's arc kind of accumulates with his vision at the Weirwood Tree. The vision itself is a lot of fan service. The White Walkers, Daenerys, Bloodraven, and of course there are some parts of it that are a bit of a mystery still, such as Helena's involvement. It all does lead to one conclusion. A Daemon who is now ready to follow Rhaenyra. A Daemon who's ready to play his part in the grand scheme of things. A Daemon who now knows his place in the story. Thus, when Rhaenyra comes to Harrenhal, he's changed and more prepared for what's to come. Now, while I wasn't a fan of the scene where Daemon reconfirms his loyalty to Rhaenyra, I did overall really enjoy Daemon's arc. I loved they are really reaching into this magical side of Westeros in a way the main show never did. And while yes, you can argue Daemon's arc this season may have been repetitive, objectively though, I did enjoy it. I really think Aegon was MVP this season, given how disliked he rightly was after season 1. I was surprised how quickly he became a fan favourite this season. It's encouraging to know that there's still enough people out there who can enjoy a character without liking them as a person or agreeing with everything they do. Tom Glencarny was phenomenally charismatic as Aegon and really added so many different dimensions to him. He's the cocky, arrogant, drunk Targaryen prince. But we also really got to see his insecurities, his need for approval and love. We see the weakness and strengths in Aegon. His relationship with his mother is really key to his arc this season. His need for support and love. And Alicent, given her own troubles, unable to provide that. The moment in episode 2, when she walks in on Aegon crying after Jaehaerys' murder, only to turn around and walk away, speaks volumes about both characters and their relationship. Blood and Cheese adds this steel and hardness inside Aegon, his growing frustration at not being listened to, then his mother's nonchalant dismissal of his attempts to do the right thing, be a good king, triggers that rash part of Aegon that leads to his foolish decision to fly to Rook's Rest. Anyone who read the books can tell you just how pivotal Rook's Rest is to Aegon's character growth, because it strips him of nearly everything he is, and thus Aegon now has to rediscover himself and redefine what victory in this war means to him. Is this about him claiming what he views as his birthright? Is this about revenge? What is his motivation now? What's interesting here is his relationship with both Aemond and Larys strong. While Rook's Rest and his injuries during the physical battle were not really Aegon's fault, it is a accumulation of his tense relationship with Aemond over their childhood. But what I really find compelling with Aegon's arc is how Larys, while clearly having his own motivations and agenda, and knowing how to play Aegon for his own gain, does give Aegon what he wanted all season. What Alicent failed to give him: love, support, and guidance. While it seems like Aegon's arc will be going off book in season 3, given he seems to be going to Essos, and Larys is in fact coming with him and not staying in King's Landing, I really can't wait to see what they do with it, and how they're going to evolve and carry on Aegon's journey. Aemond has an interesting arc this season. Some parts of it I like, some I don't. What I find very disappointing is the show had a very small time jump after season 1, which meant we never really got to see the reaction to Aemond killing Lucerys. Having Otto and Alicent horrified, while Aegon is ecstatic, it would have gone a long way in establishing the divide that appears within the Greens. During this moment, Alicent's reaction and horror at the death would have actually made her interaction with Rhaenyra this season make a little bit more sense, and generally set her on the path of her own character arc, where the show instead just chooses to drop us right in it. But it seems that Aemond is owning the death, even though the show made it clear it was very accidental. The show in the opening episode did a really good job at showing us Aemond's frustration, while also establishing the underlying tension that has always been a part of his relationship with Aegon. His actions at Rook's Rest have been a major sore point for a lot of people this season, and while I don't personally love the idea of Aemond intentionally trying to burn Aegon, I'm not wholly surprised that the show chose to go in that direction. It was a reflection on the difficult relationship he had with Aegon, combined with his own ambition. A big factor that makes all of this so different than his book storyline is due to Maelor not being in the show. After Jaehaerys' death, it makes Aemond Aegon's heir, one step away from being king himself. Of course, once he's made Prince Regent, he does become very pragmatic and slightly tyrannical, a much harsher ruler than the small council were used to at this time, not someone they could placate and use for their own agenda. While Aemond doesn't go as far as wearing the crown, the fact he now is carrying Blackfire says a hell of a lot. I very much see Aemond and Daemon as two sides of the same coin, similar in many ways but also quite different. This season, Aemond certainly channeled his inner rogue prince, and in a way, his story mirrors that of Daemon, with each ending up in opposite places. You have Daemon who has accepted his place in the story. He's not the king. he was never meant to be king, and while Aemond, who is now driven by his desire for power and respect, is something he never really had. There is also a deep interconnection with Alicent in the sense that Aemond is part of the reason she finds herself with less and less power and being drawn to Rhaenyra and the idea of peace. But what I find so compelling is when Aemond calls out Alicent during that final episode that he is acting to protect their very lives. He really isn't wrong and rightly highlights how lost Alicent is when trying to come to terms with Rhaenyra yet again. Aemond is willing to see the brutal truth. Alicent is still refusing to accept. I found all 3 of the Dragonseed arcs very well done, each for different reasons. First, you have Ulf, who is very much a common man, a drunk, lazy, living off the rumours of his parentage in a tavern. But what is so interesting about Ulf is why of course he claims he is the son of Balon the Brave. He's not actually 100% sure. That's just what his mother told him. But how can he really know it's true? I think he hopes it's true, because to him it's what makes him more than what others see him as, which in turn is why I think after he does claim Silverwing, he's quite nonchalant and arrogant about it. You then have Hugh. His backstory in the show is fine. I think him having a wife and the Tumbleton name drops are going to be very important in how his story develops in the show, and makes his role in the book make a lot more sense. Like I said in my review, the lore part of me loved the idea of Hugh being the son of Serra Targaryen, even if it does stretch what is possible in the timeline a little bit. I made a whole video breaking down the idea of how Serra being his mother is not as clear cut as the show seems to make it. Then we get to Adam and Alan. There is still a fair bit I don't understand about their storyline, namely why they swapped the ages of Adam and Alan around, but I do suspect it may have just been because they really liked the actors. Adam is very much like his book character, and while the method which he claims Sea Smoke is very different than in the book, he still is shown as unreservedly loyal to Rhaenyra, even though at this stage she's not really done anything for him to ensure that loyalty like she does in the book. I think it's very much because they plan on having the revelation that Corlys is his father be something they build to in season 3, maybe after the Gullet. Then we have Alan. Controversial take, but my favourite Dragonseed arc this season. I do think it was a bit poor having him literally be in the same dock near all season, but I guess that's just one of the limitations of shooting. The context of Corlys and Alan's relationship seems to be very different than in the show versus the book, in the sense that in the book, Alan and his mother seem to be quite well off, where in the show, they grew up rather poor, with I suspect his mother actually dying quite young. Thus the lack of Corlys in his life is a much bigger impact in the show. While Corlys does seem to want to support Alan, without directly acknowledging him as his son by employing him and his brother, there does seem to be this underlying tension between the pair. It's clear as the season goes on that Corlys is starting to come to terms with the diminishing legacy and has started to realise how Alan might in fact be the perfect heir he's always wanted. Given the fact that Corlys, being the father of Alan and Adam, is still a secret in the show, I'm looking forward to see how they play this in season 3. That final scene with Alan finally snapping at Corlys was very powerful, and I hope we get more like it next season. I think the relationship between Alicent Hightower and Criston Cole was one of the most universally disliked parts of season 2. I do think some of the creative choices are poor, and I think it playing such a key role in the show's version of Blood and Cheese was a very bad decision. I said after episode 6 that as the season went on, I sort of understood the concept of Alicent and Criston's relationship a little bit better, and what the writers were trying to do with it. There are, believe it or not, some redeemable factors to it when you take a step back and look at the character arcs of both Criston Cole and Alicent. In the end, the relationship comes down to 2 key elements: power and freedom. And this kind of reflects in the sex scenes between the pair. Now the first 2 sex scenes between Alicent and Criston Cole clearly shows Alicent as the person with the power in this situation, who is in charge, who is driving this. But the third scene flips that on its head, where we now have Criston, now the person with the power, becoming the commanding presence and instigating the moment. What this does is mirror Alicent's loss of her power after the crowning of Aegon, as she's slowly pushed out over the course of the season, with her father being removed as hand a big part of that, while at the same time, Criston has unexpectedly found himself the new hand of the king and the second most powerful man in the realm. In a way, it flips the roles of Alicent and Criston, which I think reflects in the context of their relationship. This relationship also fits into both Alicent and Criston Cole's wider character arcs in multiple ways. In Alicent's case, it's her new desire for freedom. As a child, she was taken away from her home in Old Town to court, where she was eventually forced to marry a man twice her age and have multiple children before even turning 20. While of course there was some affection in her relationship with Viserys, it's clear Alicent was very much doing her duty as a queen and a wife. There was no passion or joy in it for Alicent. When Viserys died, she found herself with a new freedom that she's never known before. It makes sense she would take a lover. It would also make sense for that man to be Criston Cole, whom she knows is unwaveringly loyal to her. Over the course of the season, as Alicent is pushed out of power, with people caring less about what she's up to, she finds herself with more and more freedom and free will, with it all accumulating with the final scene of the season. In my mind, there is no doubt that Criston Cole loves Alicent, but I think there's definitely a question as to if he's in love with her or in love with the idea of her. Criston's final scene of the season, where he's confronted by Alicent's brother Gawain, really tells us a lot about Criston's mindset, and I'm really looking forward to where they're going to take him in Season 3 with this post-traumatic stress arc he seems to be heading in. He also, I think, had one of the most iconic lines this season when talking about the horror he saw at Rook's Rest. Alicent Hightower is the woman who saved his life twice. One of those times stopping him from killing himself. She became his beacon and moral compass. Thus, it does make me wonder whether he loves Alicent as a person or is in love with the idea of Alicent and what she represents to him. I do also wonder if we will delve into this further in Season 3. Alicent's feelings are a lot less clear than Criston's, and I can't quite settle on what I think. On one hand, there definitely was some aspect of feeling towards Criston. We see this when he marches off to Rook's Rest and Harrenhal. There was also clearly some attraction prior in Season 1, but whether she has any love for Criston, I don't think is really that important to her arc, in the sense for Alicent, her main focus with this was really testing this newfound freedom she's lacked her whole life. Yes, there was a hell of a lot of missteps with this storyline, and I personally would rather it not have happened. But the reason I chose to talk about it in this review is because when you take a step back and look at it in the context of the season as a whole, it does kind of thematically and narratively fit what the writers were trying to do with both Alicent and Criston as characters, and does work a hell of a lot better as a storyline now we have the full picture. It doesn't excuse how messy it was written and how badly implemented it was, but there was a core of a good idea in there. So while I dislike how it was handled, I have found it much more palatable during a rewatch of the season than my first impression. The freedom element of her relationship with Criston Cole is a key part in Alicent's story arc this season. There is a lot that Season 2 did right, and there is a lot I felt it did poorly. Alicent, and by extension Rhaenyra's arc this season, was one of those poorer elements. It became very clear after Alicent's first meeting with Rhaenyra where her arc was going to be going. She's now full of self-doubt and questioning her role in the war, and starting to question the values of herself and the morality of her own children. Alicent Hightower in Season 2 is not any Alicent Hightower I know from the books or even Season 1. She was for me one of my favourite parts of the first season, and for the most part I really liked the changes made to her character from the book. Seeing her relationship with Rhaenyra fall apart, see her becoming this fierce protective mother who loves her children, fighting for their survival. All of that seems to have dissipated. She's now a poor mother, abandoning her son to his grief, then belittling him when he asks for her help. Aemond, who she nearly stabbed Rhaenyra for, is now a monster. She barely knows Daemon. She only really seems to care about Helaena. That fire that drove Alicent, that fight within her, is just gone. Yes, it does fit into the character arc, but I really can't help but feel her character arc was forced down this path, and it wasn't really a natural progression from her character in Season 1. It all really seemed to serve her role in the final scene of the season, where Rhaenyra claims Alicent needs to make a sacrifice, with Alicent apparently now willing to sacrifice and sell out to her own children, brother, father, lover. For what? This vague idea of freedom. The bit that will never sit right with me is that Alicent has been sacrificing herself for others her whole life. Yet this is the message the show has decided to run with at the conclusion of her arc this season. Does Alicent have a defined character arc in Season 2? Yes. Can you see the progress with it from episode to episode? Yes. From where she starts in Season 2 to where she ended, it makes sense. But, and this is the key bit, at the cost of what defined her as a character. They forced the character to fit the story they wanted to tell, rather than tell a story with the characters they had. I'll talk more about this final scene later, but before I do, it's important to talk about the other aspects of it. Rhaenyra. She, very much like Alicent, had a lot of new content added to make her arc work this season, given how little she does during this time in the books. There are several criticisms you can level at her arc, which are similar to Alicent and Daemon's, in the sense most of her screen time is spent in rooms on Dragonstone, occasionally venturing to other places. Rhaenyra is still trying to find a way to avoid war, hence her meeting with Alicent at the start of the season, and that theme is very much the focus of her arc. It never did quite sit right with me, after the deaths of Lucerys and Jaehaerys, that it should have been very clear that war was now unavoidable. For me, what makes her arc work better than, say, Alicent's is the progression does feel more natural, in the sense she's just adjusting to becoming this leader and her growing power and establishing herself with this authority as a ruling queen among her small council, who often overlook and undermine her unintentionally. Over the season, she's forced to make harder and harder choices, such as the idea of finding new dragon riders, and when it gets to the point it comes to her having to accept that the only way that this war will only end with the deaths of thousands. The issue is, as I mentioned in my season finale review, is that it all kind of felt a bit hollow, given how many supposed points of no return the show has had. Aemon's Eye, the Green Council, Luke's death, Blood and Cheese, Rook's Rest. Why are we still trying to find peace and avoid war when it's very clear at this point we are in a war, and the only way it's ending is if Aegon or Rhaenyra is dead? I know how much some enjoyed the reunion scenes this season, but I can't help but feel they were a disservice to the characters by this point in the story. Like I said in my review of episode 8, I think it's time the show moved on from this relationship being the core of the story and allow the story to grow and breathe, rather than hyperfixating on this one element at the cost of the overall narrative. I think the first meeting between Alicent and Rhaenyra just about works, if it meant something, that is. If this was the final hope of peace gone, both sides now committed to their path no matter the cost, if we were now feeling the consequences of the war. To me, the second meeting kind of undermines it slightly, and like I said in my episode 8 review, I can see what the writers were going for with it, but it does kind of make so many key events feel like they have no consequence and don't matter. I think some other character arcs, which I will briefly mention, that jump out at me this year was Jace, whom, while I would have preferred his book arc, did have some really great moments in the back half of the season. Rhaenyra did get a lot more screen time, however I don't really think it landed with me personally. You then have, of course, the Nettles element of it, which I think needs to be a video in itself. I was disappointed we never really got much of an arc for Helaena. While she did have a bigger role this season, there is just so much more they could have done with her. Oddly, I think they handled Rhaenys really well, given how little time we had with her. In the episode with Rook's Rest alone, we get such a deep look into her character and her relationship with Corlys. I do also think the show missed the presence of Otto Hightower badly. He was phenomenal in the few scenes we had him, and it was a crying shame he had so little to do. But on the flip side, it does seem like they're going to be expanding his story a lot in season 3. I want to take a moment to just talk about what I see as the big 3 events this season. First off, we have Rook's Rest, which for the most part was very well done, and you can tell no expense was spared with it. The dragon battle was exciting and brutal, while of course the Aemond burning Aegon aspect of it was always going to be divisive. Rook's Rest still does enough for me to be considered one of the high points of the season. What I didn't expect to really see, however, was how horrific the battle was on the ground. It did a really good job at translating the description we get in Fire and Blood to screen. Like Rook's Rest, the sowing of the Dragonseeds was also exhilarating to watch. And again, you can tell no expense was spared here. While with the show's version of it, I did need to suspend my disbelief for a moment, as it really didn't make as much practical sense as in the book version, I think it did translate well to TV. It was great to see Vermithor and Silverwing, given how important they are to true Targaryen lore prior to the Dance of the Dragons. As time has passed, I dislike the show's take on Blood and Cheese more and more. I do think the changes were needed given the context of the TV show and what they can and cannot do. For example, it was never going to be as bloody and gory as the book. but I can't help but feel Blood and Cheese had so much more to give than the show allowed it. I do suspect some of this was due to the rapid pace of season 1, not allowing us to really know the characters involved. The lack of Maelor 2 certainly played a part, but for me it all comes down to the lack of long-term impact of the moment, and this is a theme you see throughout season 2. Lack of long-term impact and consequence. Jaehaerys' death is very quickly forgotten, and almost meaningless. Rhaenyra's line saying a son for a son in a finale, when asking Alicent to make a sacrifice, just sums this up for me. Really, Jaehaerys' death and Blood and Cheese just doesn't matter. Not to Rhaenyra, not to Alicent. It happened, then 2 episodes later was forgotten. As I said, the show did this a lot this season. For example, you can make the same argument when talking about Lucerys' death. The show often builds up the stakes of these moments, then quickly moves on, resulting in scenes where Alicent and Rhaenyra are still trying to cling to peace, when in all honesty that moment is now long past. Something I don't think has helped in the wider discourse of the discussion and debate about the season is the writers and the directors in post-episode reviews through both official HBO content and in the wider press. They often regularly contradict each other. For example, the Daenerys Dragon Eggs situation, where the statement of the director of the episode and Ryan Condal dramatically differ. You also have writers presenting their own headcanon when talking to the press, when it doesn't really reflect what they've shown on screen, which kind of implies their intentions and what we got in reality didn't really plan out. And of course, Ryan Condal's famous line that will haunt my dreams. Well, that was just propaganda, which he often used as a get-out-of-jail-free card when trying to justify choices the writers had made. All this confusion ended up doing is, well, confusing fans about what was actually going on and what was actually the intent of the writers. The amount of arguments I've had in my comment sections that when I looked into them came down to the fact 2 different writers said 2 different things in interviews was baffling. So next year, I hope they just stop giving press interviews so fragrantly, or just make sure everyone is on the same page of what the line is. There's a lot you can say about Season 2, and I don't think this will be my last video on it. I think if people are interested, I am going to make 30 to 40 minute long videos about each character arc this season, because this review and my weekly ones have only scratched the surface. There is some really good stuff in Season 2 that deserve a lot of attention, but there are also some very poor elements that need to be highlighted. It's really not black and white, so maybe expect some more videos like this in the weeks ahead, and a lot more focused on individual storylines throughout the season. Like I said, this season wasn't awful, but it's not exactly great either. I don't know. For me at least, it kind of lost that magic that season 1 had that made me fall in love with it so much. If you watch my weekly review videos, you know my episode scores this season ranged between 6 and 8, and on balance, more often than not, they were a 7 out of 10, which I think reflects this season fairly.